Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Always great to be back.
Today we're going to be tackling the economic fallout from the war in Gaza.
Yeah. It's a tough subject for sure, but
Yeah,
it's really important we take a look at the numbers
absolutely.
and see what kind of challenges
Yeah,
Israel's going to be facing going forward.
especially Israel.
Yeah,
That's going to be our focus today.
exactly.
So let's just start with the big picture.
Okay.
We have this data from the OECD, and it's
No.
not looking great.
No.
The OECD is saying that Israel's economy is slowing down faster than any other developed nation.
It really, I think it speaks to just how much things have changed.
Yeah.
Prior to the war,
Right.
Israel's economy was really doing well. I mean, it was thriving,
It was.
driven in large part by tech.
Yeah.
Back in 2021, they had a per capita GDP growth of 6.8%.
That's incredible.
I mean, that is a growth rate that most Western countries would
Right.
absolutely envy.
They were on a roll.
Yeah, they really were.
And then the Hamas attack happened in October,
Right.
and we saw an immediate drop in
Yeah.
GDP of 4.1%.
Immediately.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like 2024 is going to
Yeah.
be much better.
No, the projections aren't looking good.
Right.
The Bank of Israel, initially, they had a much more
Yeah.
optimistic outlook, but they've had to drastically revise that forecast.
Okay.
They're now predicting a growth of just 1.5%
Wow.
for 2024.
That's a massive difference.
Huge drop.
So what exactly is
Yeah.
contributing to this
I mean, for
dramatic slowdown?
the cost of war is massive. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a huge factor. The Bank of Israel estimates
Okay.
that the total cost by 2025
Wow.
is going to be a staggering $67 billion.
$67 billion?
Right.
That's hard to even
It's hard to even fathom.
wrap your head around.
It really is.
And I mean, even with the $14.5 billion aid package from
yeah.
the U.S.,
I mean,
it seems like a drop in the bucket.
It's substantial,
Yeah.
but you're right. It might not be enough to
Mhm.
really offset this damage. So, Israel's facing some tough
Mhm.
choices here. They're either going to have to make some really significant spending cuts in
Yeah.
other areas,
Like what?
like crucial areas, like education,
Right.
infrastructure, or they're going to have to resort to increasing their borrowing.
And increasing that debt load
Right, comes with a whole other
Yeah.
set of problems.
down the line.
Down the line, exactly. So,
Seems like they're really caught
yeah.
between a rock and a hard place.
They are, and we're already seeing, the financial markets reacting to this.
Mhm.
Back in August, Fitch downgraded Israel's credit rating,
Yeah.
and this is a signal to investors, that lending money to Israel is now riskier,
Okay.
which means higher borrowing costs for the country.
So that could have a kind of ripple effect.
It really could.
Make it harder for them to, fund those essential services.
Yeah.
And, invest in future growth.
Exactly, and this financial pressure couldn't come at a worse time.
Right.
Because we have to remember the conflict is still ongoing.
Yeah.
And it's impacting so many different sectors of the Israeli economy.
Like what?
The construction sector, for example,
Okay.
that's seen a slowdown of almost a third.
A third.
Yeah, almost a third.
Wow.
So
That's a lot.
it is. And then you have agriculture
Uh.
that's been hit hard as well.
In what way?
Production in some areas is down by about 25%.
Wow.
So you can already see
Right?
the widespread economic damage that's starting to happen.
Right. It's all happening right now.
It is. And then
Yeah.
you have the human cost,
Right. Yeah.
the labor shortage that stems from the war.
Well, let's talk about that
Yeah.
because I know that they've called up.
360,000 reservists have been called up for military service.
Right.
So that's immediately created this huge gap in the workforce.
Right. And then we also have.
And on top of that, you have
Mhm.
about 120,000 Israelis who have been displaced from their homes.
Right. On the border.
Yeah, from the border areas.
So they're not working
They
yet.
can't work, so it's adding to that labor shortage even more.
So it's people forced out of their jobs and then
Yes.
others unable to work.
Exactly.
It's a double whammy.
It is a double whammy, and then you add on to that
Yeah.
the fact that Israel has banned about 140,000 Palestinian workers
Right.
from the West Bank who normally work in Israel.
So you have this pre-existing labor shortage,
Yeah.
and then you just add on to it.
And it's just exacerbated by this
Yeah.
ban.
And what are the long term?
Well, I mean, businesses are struggling.
Okay.
They're really struggling. And there are estimates that
Right.
up to 60,000 Israeli businesses
Wow.
could be forced to close in 2024
Really?
due to labor shortages,
Oh, yeah.
disruptions in their supply chains,
Right.
and just a general decline in business confidence.
And that decline in confidence is kind of across the board, isn't
It
it?
is, yeah. It's
Shit.
across the board. Even the tourism industry,
Okay.
which, isn't as central to Israel's economy as, say, tech is feeling. This
Yeah.
1 in 10 hotels are at risk of closure.
Wow.
So it just adds to that overall sense of,
Instability.
yeah, instability.
It's like one problem is leading to another.
It is.
And then to another.
A cascade.
Yeah. It's a cascade effect.
Yeah, and it's making it harder and harder for that economy to recover.
Yeah. And this is all happening, of course,
Right.
while a war is still going on.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to keep in mind
Yeah.
that what we're seeing now with these immediate impacts,
Yeah.
this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
This conflict has the potential to have really profound and long-lasting consequences.
So the big question then is,
Yeah,
what can be done
right.
to kind of mitigate this damage
Yeah.
and help Israel navigate this
Yeah.
incredibly challenging situation?
Well, that's what we're going to dig into next.
Okay.
We're going to explore the potential role of U.S. aid.
Okay.
Look at what strategies Israel could adopt
Yeah.
and examine what a long-term recovery might look like.
That sounds good. I'm ready when you are.
All right, let's do it.
Let's go.
Yeah. So, the question of how to help Israel navigate this economic crisis, it's complicated.
Right.
There are a lot of different layers to it.
Yeah.
But we know the U.S. has pledged a significant aid package.
Yeah. 14.5 billion.
Right. But even that,
Yeah.
as we discussed, may not be enough.
Yeah. So let's talk about that aid.
Okay.
Where do you think that money could
Yeah.
be most impactful?
Well, there are a few different schools of thought on this.
Okay.
Some argue that a good chunk of it
Okay.
should go towards bolstering Israel's defense capabilities.
So they can defend themselves.
Exactly. The idea being that,
Right.
a stronger defense deters future attacks.
Okay.
And that creates a more stable environment for
Right.
economic recovery.
So you invest in the security now.
Exactly.
And then
That's
you guys can buy.
conditions for growth later.
It makes sense.
Right. It's about, giving Israel the resources it needs
Right.
to protect itself. And that, in turn, boosts investor confidence,
Right.
encourages economic activity.
But wouldn't that just be focusing on defense?
Well, that's the counter argument.
Okay.
Others say that a large portion of that aid
Yeah.
should be channeled towards revitalizing the Israeli economy directly.
Okay. So like a stimulus package.
Kind of like an economic stimulus, yeah.
And what would that look like?
Well, it could involve,
Yeah.
providing financial support to struggling businesses.
Okay.
Especially those 60,000 businesses that we talked about
Right. That are at risk.
that are on the verge of shutting down.
Of closure.
Exactly. Imagine, targeted aid programs.
Right.
Maybe even loan guarantees. That could help them stay afloat.
Keep it going.
Keep them going, keep people employed,
Right.
and prevent further economic contraction.
It makes sense.
Right. And then beyond direct aid to businesses,
Yeah.
you also have to think about investing in infrastructure projects
Okay.
that create jobs.
Wait.
Large-scale projects that improve transportation energy, communication networks. These types of projects can have a real multiplier effect,
Right. They can touch so many different things.
Exactly. Stimulating economic activity across multiple sectors.
And of course, we have to remember the people
Of course.
that have been impacted,
Absolutely.
the families, individuals.
A portion of that aid
Yeah.
could be directed towards providing financial assistance
Okay.
to those who have lost their jobs or their homes due to the war.
So thinking about things like,
Yeah, like unemployment benefits,
right.
housing subsidies,
Yeah.
job training programs to help people get back on their feet.
So it's about striking that balance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Investing in the security,
Yes.
creating that stability, but then also
That's right.
providing that economic support.
It's a two-pronged approach.
Right.
Bolster security while simultaneously addressing the immediate economic hardship
Yeah.
and then laying that groundwork
Right.
for a long-term recovery.
But wouldn't that require just a massive amount of aid?
It would.
Like, how do you...
And that's why,
Right.
the long-term economic outlook for Israel, it really hinges on
Yeah.
whether this initial aid package is just the beginning
Right.
or if it's a one-time thing.
It can't just be a Band-Aid.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need ongoing care and attention for a wound to truly heal.
Yeah, you can't just slap a Band-Aid on and expect it to be fine.
Exactly. And this kind of brings us to another
Okay.
crucial aspect of this,
Yeah.
the role that U.S. aid could play in fostering cooperation and economic development
Okay.
in the region as a whole.
So not just thinking about Israel's immediate needs.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But thinking about the whole region.
The bigger picture, yeah.
Okay.
You know, remember we talked about how interconnected the Israeli and Palestinian economies are?
Right.
What if a portion of that U.S. aid
Yeah.
was used to promote joint economic ventures
Interesting.
that benefit both sides?
Okay, give me an example.
Well, imagine like cross-border trade initiatives that would
Right.
make it easier for Israeli and Palestinian businesses
Right.
to, work together, or infrastructure projects
Okay.
that serve both populations,
Right.
like a shared transportation network,
Okay.
or a joint energy grid.
I mean, those sound like pretty ambitious.
They are.
Yeah. Undertaking.
They are challenging for sure,
Yeah.
especially given, the current political climate.
Right. Is that kind of collaboration even realistic?
I mean, it's definitely challenging.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah.
There have been, successful examples
Okay.
of economic cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians in the past,
So-
even during times of conflict.
Okay. Like what?
Well, for example, there have been joint ventures
Right.
in agriculture
Okay.
where Palestinian farmers have supplied produce
Okay.
to Israeli markets.
So it's happened on a smaller scale.
Exactly. It has happened. And I think U.S. aid
Right.
could play a key role
Okay.
in scaling up those kinds of efforts.
How so?
Well, it could provide the funding,
Okay.
the technical expertise,
Aye.
and even, the diplomatic backing
Okay.
to make these ventures
Right.
more viable.
So instead of this adversarial relationship,
Right.
use the economics
Yes.
to kind of,
To build bridges.
build a bridge to peace.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
true security and lasting prosperity for Israel
Yeah.
are intertwined with the well-being of its neighbors.
Okay.
It's recognizing that everyone benefits
Yeah.
from a more stable and prosperous region.
So I can't help but think that kind of approach
Yeah.
would be met with a lot of resistance
Oh, absolutely.
from hardliners.
There are always going to be people who resist any form of cooperation.
Right. Of course.
But, it's important to remember
Yeah.
that there are also many Israelis and Palestinians
Uh-huh.
who genuinely desire peace
Okay.
and are willing to work together
Right.
to achieve it.
So the U.S. aid could be used
And U.S. aid could be a very powerful tool
to support those people.
to support those voices,
Right.
to create conditions for dialogue and collaboration.
But this is generations of mistrust.
It is.
We're talking about deeply entrenched conflicts.
Absolutely.
This isn't going to be a quick fix.
No, there's no magic wand solution here.
Yeah.
But I think the economic realities we've been discussing
Yeah.
underscore how unsustainable the status quo is.
Right.
The cost of this conflict, both human and economic,
Yeah.
it's just too high.
It's a lot
It is.
to think about.
It is.
So as we wrap up here, what are your final thoughts
Well, I think
on potential pathways to recovery?
the first and most crucial step
Yeah.
is a lasting ceasefire.
Of course.
I mean, without that, it's like
Okay.
trying to rebuild a house while
Right.
it's still on fire.
You got to put the fire out first.
You have to put the fire out first,
Okay.
exactly.
And what?
Well, alongside that ceasefire,
Yeah.
there needs to be, a real commitment from
Yeah.
both sides to engage in dialogue
Right.
and negotiations,
Address those root issues.
address the root causes of the conflict.
But that's easier said than done.
Well, it is much easier said than done,
Yeah.
but it's essential.
Yeah.
But then beyond those political and diplomatic efforts,
Right.
there are also practical steps that
Okay.
can be taken.
Okay. What do you mean?
Well, for Israel, it means addressing those long-term challenges. We talked about,
The labor shortage.
the labor shortage,
Mhm.
the declining business confidence,
Uh-huh.
the need to diversify the economy beyond just tech.
So it's kind of looking inward a little
Looking inward and becoming more resilient and adaptable.
bit. Okay. And for Palestine.
For Palestine, the focus has to be on rebuilding that shattered infrastructure,
Right.
revitalizing the agricultural sector,
Yeah.
and creating opportunities for its people,
Especially in Gaza,
especially in Gaza.
which has been hit so hard.
Devastated.
Yeah.
And that's where international support is going to be vital.
So countries around the world need to step up
They do.
and provide that support.
Financial and technical assistance.
Not just money, but expertise.
Exactly. It's about investing in a future
Right.
where both Israelis and Palestinians can thrive.
Palestinian conflict, right?
Yeah.
The human cost, the politics.
Absolutely. It's constantly in the headlines.
But we rarely stop to think, how much is this costing the U.S.? Not just aid, but the whole shebang.
That's what we're looking at today, right? Following the money trail.
Exactly. And luckily, the Cost of War Project at Brown University, they've crunched the numbers for us.
Those guys are incredible. The depth of their research is amazing.
Seriously. So are you ready for a number that'll knock your socks off?
Hit me with it.
Through September 30th of this year alone, at least $22.76 billion. With the B.
Whoa! Well, for context, that's more than some entire country's budgets.
Right. And remember, this conflict is still ongoing, so who knows what the final tally will be.
Makes you think, doesn't it, about where all that money's going.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to unpack today. So of that $22.76 billion, a whopping $17.9 went directly to Israel.
Since October 7th of last year, right, which is, historically speaking, just unprecedented.
It is, even surpassing previous years where, the U.S. has always provided significant aid, but
This is a whole other level. Shows you how deep the commitment to Israel's security is.
for sure. And then there's another chunk, $4.86 billion, that's going towards U.S. military operations.
Specifically targeting Houthi militants in Yemen.
Now, some folks might be thinking, wait, Yemen, what does that have to do with Israel and Palestine?
Right. Seems unrelated at first glance, but the situation's way more connected than it might appear.
So for those who need a refresher, who are the Houthis?
Well, they're this militant group based in Yemen, and they have these, well, let's say, complex ties to Iran.
And they claim their actions are directly related to what's happening in Gaza. They see Israel as
And part of a larger system they oppose. So to them, it's all connected.
And this U.S. military campaign in Yemen, it's been going on for years, right?
Yep. Actually, it's the longest sustained U.S. military campaign since the fight against ISIS.
Which, most people probably don't even realize. It's kind of flown under the radar.
Definitely. And adding to that, the Houthis have been targeting maritime trade more and more.
Forcing the U.S. to rethink its naval presence in the region, which, of course, all costs money.
Big time. So, we've got that $22.76 billion, but even that doesn't capture the whole picture.
You're talking about the indirect costs.
Exactly. Think about it. Trade routes get disrupted, ships have to reroute, insurance premiums skyrocket.
And who ends up footing the bill for all that?
Ultimately, it's the consumer. We all pay for it in the form of higher prices for goods.
So even if we're not directly involved, we're still feeling the effects in our wallets.
100%. And that's just the stuff we can easily measure, right? There's also
The unquantifiable costs.
yeah, like the long-term care for veterans, the potential for future instability that requires even more spending.
Damaged diplomatic relationships. It all adds up.
And it's much harder to put a price tag on those things, but the impact is very real.
The report also touches on something else that's, a bit of a sensitive topic.
You mean the connection between the U.S. government and the arms industry?
Yeah. A lot of these companies, they've had close ties with Israel for decades.
Which, raises some questions. How much does that influence policy in the region?
Right, and our taxpayer dollars essentially subsidizing these companies. It's a complex web.
For sure. And we can't forget, we're only looking at a snapshot in time here.
The Cost of War Project, their data only goes up to September 30th, so.
As the conflict goes on, that price tag is just going to keep climbing.
And it's not just about money either. The human cost is immense.
Absolutely. The Costs of War Project, they have another report that looks at indirect deaths.
So people who die as a consequence of the conflict, but not directly because of the fighting.
Right. Things like lack of access to health care or displacement leading to dangerous conditions.
It really shows you how far-reaching the consequences are.
And it's a sobering reminder that every dollar spent, every life lost, has a ripple effect.
Well, this deep dive has certainly opened my eyes to some of the hidden costs of this conflict.
Mine too. It's a complex issue, and there are no easy answers.
But understanding the financial side of it, it's crucial. It affects us all, even if indirectly.
Agreed. And it makes you think about the trade-offs, the long-term consequences.
Definitely. If you're interested in learning more, we highly recommend checking out the full reports.
They're from the Costs of War Project, and we'll link them in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Until next time.
See you then.